This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast from Advanta IRA, where we show you how to explore investments beyond Wall Street and open your eyes to new options for your portfolio. It's time to take control and give yourself the freedom to choose where you invest your money.
And welcome to another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Today, we're very pleased to welcome on Gary Sinderbrand, with the founder of BetterPath Training, to cover a topic that I think a lot of people certainly are aware of, the fact that AI exists, but past just maybe thinking that ChatGPT can be an interesting way to find an answer to a question, or some of those annoying pop-ups that seem to be coming on any software that you have today, including things like Adobe Reader, asking if you want to use their AI tools. Most of us are kind of maybe a little bit ignorant of just how useful some of these tools can be, or even exactly how to use them. Certainly, machine learning tools have their place in a lot of different applications in our day-to-day lives, but understanding how those things can kind of permeate into things, past just, hey, what's this question on Google, but actually helping us and being able to utilize these powerful tools for helping to create things such as financial plans, understanding correlations between assets, helping us to, in turn, create some more security and diversification within our investment portfolios, is something that I think a lot of us could certainly understand that might be a tool that could be done with these, but probably are no sooner able to tell you where to start than we are can pick out what we're going to eat for dinner tonight. So Gary, I really appreciate you being on with us today. If you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of background about yourself and kind of how you came to be in your current role with BetterPath Training, and what you're trying to actually put out there in the world with understanding AI and its tools and relevance to financial planning and investments.
Oh, thanks, Alex. A lot to unpack there. Let's kind of start at the beginning. I was hired at a very young age. I think I was 23 years old when I was hired as I guess back there they called us account executives at a very small Merrill Lynch office in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Gaming had just passed in Atlantic City, and I guess Merrill Lynch wanted some representation there. I was a rookie. I had no idea what I was doing. Over the course of my first year, I found I knew less and less. Training that was provided was primarily product-based. We had a variety of people come to us over 1 month in New York and basically tell us that their product was the product we should focus on, and don't listen to anybody else. And it was always kind of, you cross out your notes from the day before and figure out what we're going to do the next day. Essentially, I got back to my office. I was given a desk, a phone, $1,000 a month in salary, and a really encouraging move by the manager. I don't think you're going to make it, but good luck. Stumbled through my first year, came close to quitting because I didn't like what I was doing. It bore absolutely no resemblance to what I thought it would be. Fortunately, by my second year, I started to run into some senior management that saw that I'd been very productive in my first year. And my comment was, well, let's see, I made a lot of money for the firm. I made more money for myself than I thought, but none of my clients made money. And the senior manager said, well, you got 2 out of 3. So at least we're on the right track. Let's see if we can fix the rest of it. From that point forward, I stopped selling and I started listening. And I started really focusing on what the clients or customers or prospects wanted to accomplish. And a common theme came through. The theme was kind of based on fear. They had investment capital. They had no idea what they needed that money to do, what period of time it should do it in, and where they would come out. That naturally had me gravitating towards investments that were more dependable. And this was during the early to mid 80s, where interest rates were extraordinarily high. So buying municipal bonds with 8% tax-free returns seemed like a really good idea. The problem was inflation at that point was still running in that 8 to 10% range. So it was a struggle. I found the more I listened, the better I did. And interestingly enough, and apropos of our discussion today, the more I was able to educate clients as to what my thought process was and give them some baseline understanding of how the markets worked and how that might relate to their longer term goals, the more money I was able to accumulate as assets under management. That ultimately led to me going through a pretty significant revenue production hurdle at a very young age. It was always the kind of the dream of every producer to crack that $1 million production level. And I think at the time I did it, which was in my 6th year, there may have only been about 250 or 300 advisors across Merrill Lynch that had done that. I think I was among the youngest. Now it's kind of table stakes. You see it all over the place, but then again, this was some time ago. But it really set me on the course of educating. And the more I educated my clients, the better we did. Somewhere, I'd say in the early 90s, one of the upper management folks came to me and said, "We notice you're not doing anything we're recommending, but you seem to be doing really well." I was converting my business from a transactional business to a fee-based business because I didn't want clients tensing up every time they heard my voice. Oh, do I have to make a decision? What's he trying to sell me today? Is it good for him? Is it good for me? Is it good for both? So I started moving into fee-based advice because sometimes the best thing to do is nothing. And that started to hit pretty well. I was asked if I could share that methodology with a few of my colleagues, and me and one other fellow put together a pilot program, which was closely monitored by Merrill, which hit. And the control group of financial advisors we put through did substantially better than the control group of advisors that did not go through. And that led to 12 years on the road and training probably over 10,000 Merrill Lynch advisors at all phases. Most of them were advanced. A lot of them were outproducing me and my partner at the time, but it hit. And again, a lot of advisors I work with now currently at BetterPath Training, I met when I was at Merrill, and I met them several times over the years where they'd come through multiple programs. Some of them are among the biggest producers in the industry currently. So I spend my time there. Lots of things going on in that. That's a topic for another podcast probably. But I found that I really did enjoy the concept of taking complex structures and making them as simplified as possible. And in doing that, recently, I'd say within the last year or two, started to play around with a lot of AI tools to see how they might integrate into what I was doing. Briefly, in my work with individual advisors, I go through usually weekly or bi-weekly calls that I record on Zoom. And I do that against the backdrop of educational materials that every client I now work with gets up front. Maybe it's 8 to 10 hours of videos, kind of baseline training. I then combine that with all the Zoom calls that I record. And just as an experiment, I found an AI that Google put out called Google LM. It's a notebook. And I was able to upload all of the baseline videos combined with the actual outcomes of what was happening on these Zoom calls that I recorded, and basically manufacture through that a series of briefing documents, FAQs, and recommendations as to the real key issues that might be getting in the way of this advisor's success. So I created AI notebooks for every client that I work with, and it's been just remarkable. And then one other thing I recently added to that, which is still blowing me away, is I got very involved in kind of investor behavior and investor archetypes. An archetype is something that was developed by a Swiss psychiatrist/psychologist by the name of Carl Jung, who published something called the Red Book, which are all of his writings. When I found a PDF version of the Red Book online, I downloaded that into the AI, which read it immediately and said, based on everything we know about advisor, X, and all of the information we've developed in our last 50 calls, what type of individual would best suit this advisor as a client? And not only does it come back and it details the archetypes according to Jung, it also details where that person might work, the type of job they might have, and the best way to approach them. And I keep thinking to myself, when I was building my book, this would have made life so much easier. So the tools themselves that are out there, and there are, it's impossible to keep up with. But I would think about it in almost the same way your firm tries to secure administrative mandates from its outside investors. There's a target or a goal in mind that your firm wants to offer people the ability to direct their own investments in non-traditional assets. It's very structured. How do we go about and do it? And in a way, you've created kind of that landing zone for people that may not even know it's available. But if they decide they'd like to do something different, but they don't know about an administrator such as Advanta, once they find out about it, that's where they go. In my case, it was, well, I'd like to be able to consolidate all this information. What's the best way to do it? Doing an extraction by hand is certainly not going to work. So maybe I can find a tool that gets me to that same spot. So it was kind of a goals-based approach. And I think if people consider what's happening in AI, not from the perspective of, oh, these tools are too complicated, I can never use them. Think about things you'd like to accomplish that may require massive amounts of research or writing or anything that's going to take you a whole bunch of time to put together, and then see if there's an AI tool that can help you. What's really cool is you can kind of ask the AI tool about other AI tools by just typing in what you're trying to get to. I think it represents a monumental shift in how we utilize technology. And as time goes on and these AI tools accumulate more and more information and have the ability to generate novel information by pulling pieces or concepts from these models that they use, I think the future becomes pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good kind of primer for what we're going to talk about of, understanding kind of, your trajectory of, a lot of the, I mean, essentially kind of what you did in the beginning part of your career when you were transitioning to that, like getting, thrust into that training model is data scraping, right? You're getting all of these inputs from the advisors that you're working with, and then you're trying to run it into a prototype model that you have to spit out kind of a pathway forward, right? It's just the analog version of AI, what AI is doing, right? So I think what people can really understand, what I'd like to make sure that people understand about AI is that it's basically just that. You have a set of parameters that you're trying to get to an end goal, and you just feed into the AI tools. And there's ones that are built around a bunch of different stuff. I mean, ChatGPT is great, but it's not the only one that's out there. There's being new ones developed for more specific use cases every single day, right? And to your point as well, you can ask an AI tool to give you point tips on which other AI tool might be better suited for what you're doing, which is always kind of odd. It's like going to any professional, like someone coming to me and going, "Hey, what's a better administrator of self-directed assets besides you?" Right? It's like, well, come on now, like that's not in my best interest to answer that incredibly
Right.
honest. I mean, at the end of the day, I do, because I feel like being honest is gonna net me a better result than being dishonest in any part of my life. But again, you avoid that awkward conversation, right? You can get things very tailored by utilizing these. So from the perspective of where you're coming from, I think the majority of our audience is kind of on the investor side of things, right? And I think understanding how AI tools can work to that effect is very important. So when it comes to some of the biggest things that the individual investor can utilize AI for, let's maybe kind of get your thoughts on some very high level things that you think are good, and then we'll drill down into some of the specifics of either how those can be done through AI, and then also some like best practices as well, because a lot of people, I think, out there, and again myself included, when it comes to some of this new stuff, it's kind of tough to figure out, exactly how you should utilize it, right? AI is great, but you start getting too detailed and it starts to get a little muddy. And then also sifting through some inaccuracies that can come out of it. For example, I had a client this morning sent me like an actual AI transcript of how to do a private mortgage through a retirement plan. And it gave some good advice, but it also gave some fundamentally wrong things as well. So again, we'll get into that in a second, rambling a little bit. But again, from those kind of things that I mentioned of like, some high level key points for the investor on utilizing AI, what do you think are some really specific things that people should gravitate towards if they're just now starting to navigate into the world of having AI help them with their finances?
Well, there's a number of things that come to mind. I mean, you can start with, in my role as an advisor, it wasn't just about putting the assets to work in line with a specific outcome or goal. There were always other things that needed to be cared for, a lot of which I was unable to perform on my own, such as helping clients, write a will or a proper trust or mutually defective trust or durable powers of attorney or all those things. You end up with a stack of legal documents that's this thick and you don't really know what they actually say. And every time you have a question, you're going to call your attorney and ask and inquire and end up getting a bill. Well, you could just take the PDF version of that and feed it into any variety of AI tools and just ask a real question. Hey, what happens if this happens? And it reads your document and it says, okay, this is what's going to occur. Now, does the thing hallucinate from time to time? Yeah, it probably does. That's why they all have these thumbs up and thumbs down arrows, and it apologizes to you. And the next thing you know, you're talking to your machine and you're using proper diction and polite, just in case the cyber overlords take over one day, you want to be one of the people that didn't insult them.
Yeah, exactly. Be nice to the AI overlords.
Oh yeah, you never know.
Don't kick the robot dog. Don't be mean to ChatGPT, because when Skynet does happen, you want to be, hey, I was nice to you, right?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Is it going to happen? I don't know. I didn't foresee this is happening. But, one of the things that comes to mind is if you're working, let's say, with a financial advisor and they're doing their job properly, and they go through and they say, okay, you get all the information that we need, and then you check off your risk profile, which to me is just a ridiculous way to allocate people's assets. If you ask people to define the word risk, for the most part, they're going to talk about losing money. Risk is actually defined in the dictionary as a possibility of loss, damage, or injury. That's it, period. But if you put that into the account opening documents, I would guess yours included, and you replace the word risk with the possibility of loss, damage, or injury, no one's going to open an account or do anything because you just keep seeing those words come in. So where that's meaningful is that risk is an emotional response, usually triggered by the most recent occurrence. And once you make a decision as to where you stand on that, it's hard to change. So oftentimes, clients will basically select a strategy that gives them too much volatility if the markets are rising rapidly, or not enough volatility or not enough potential gain over long periods of time to get them where they need to go. And these financial plans will spit out some numbers and say, here's where you're going to end up. This is what we're going to do. And I would tell you that 95% of the time, those projections, first of all, they're only correct at the time they're made, especially if they're using something like a Monte Carlo simulation, which does thousands and thousands of iterations. And if they're not updated regularly, they don't work. And if they were driven by the client's emotional response to how they feel about risk at that time, the likelihood they're not going to work out long term is even higher. So you can go up to a variety of tools. ChatGPT could be one, Gemini could be another, Perplexity could be another, and just type in baseline information. Ask it a question. The way I am currently invested is with 40% of my money in traditional equities, 40% of my money in fixed income investments, and 20% of my money in real estate or private equity or something along those lines. I'm going to retire at X age. I need Y amount of dollars to live. Am I going to run out of money? And it's going to come back with a deeply researched report. It may go in and offer rates of return over time frames that you're not comfortable with. Well, we anticipate equities are going to make 12%. And you say, oh, I don't think it's going to make 12%. And you type in, let's reduce equities to 8%. And see what happens then. And it's just going to come out and give you an answer in English, completely irrespective of what's in your overall financial plan. You could even go so far as to print out this big plan or get it in PDF form. You could feed that in. It will read that. And you could say, here are the concerns I have. Am I on the right track? And it may come back and say, based on what's happened since you started with a 50-50 allocation and a projected, let's say, 7% return, the past 5 years you've outperformed in equities. Bonds have done what they've done, but the recommendation would be, even in a tax-advantaged account, you don't need to be carrying 68% in risk assets, you can actually get home carrying 45% or 40% in risk assets. This is one thing I will tell you that most financial advisors have fallen down on the job. They haven't done it. Clients see the markets rising through the end of 2024. FAs are getting paid on the rise in the value. Why should we change? Well, at the end of the day, it's an FA's responsibility to not solicit the client's opinion as to what should happen. But if you're going to get paid for advice, you've got to be pretty firm in having the client listen. Unfortunately, not a lot of FAs take that. So if you're a client and you're invested and you're not sure where things are going, just start talking to an AI. In this case, I probably would look at something like Gemini, which is another Google product. The amazing things, all these things are free. You're exchanging information that they will actually be able to use. Maybe not in your case, but someplace else. So you're exchanging information into that model for it to come back in a direction your way. If you don't want to share your information anywhere, you can use a notebook AI like Google LM, which only accesses the data you put in, which is what I use primarily. So again, come up with a question as an investor. Don't go to your advisor. Don't go to an outside counsel. Don't ask your attorney. You don't even have to ask your accountant. Ask the AI tool. See what it comes up with. Verify it's correct, but it's a great way to expand your practical knowledge base without having to go through all the technical training, and so you can actually use that in a day-to-day fashion.
There's a few things that you said I think are really important for people to understand. Especially for financial advisors. I mean, think about anyone that you engage in a fiduciary capacity. Your doctors, your attorneys, your financial advisors. And you mentioned something pretty interesting of the financial advisor taking outside input from the client as a basis for decision making on what they're doing. You wouldn't necessarily think that you go to your doctor and you tell them that they're going to really take that with much regard. I mean, again, they should always certainly take in, your personal feelings on stuff. But, if you have, a leg that has been halfway amputated in a motorcycle wreck, you're going to be like, okay, cool. Well, it's not going to heal with a Band-Aid. Let's take some advice, right? It's that being able to, rely on, your own opinions as opposed to waiting so much to the client's directive is something that I think, is a little bit outweighed in the financial advisory role, because again, people get real interesting when it comes to their money, right? As opposed to other, aspects of their life. So being able to use AI as a check and a balance, or even something that you can use to engage your financial advisor to get their opinions on, to help educate yourself, I think is a very powerful tool here. One thing I've run into throughout the past 14 years of my career is just that, of people often asking me saying, well, I understand what you're saying, but I don't necessarily understand the broader scope of some of these things, right? And, some of these things, I legally can't, educate them more just on, of my capacity as, not being a financial advisor. But, again, of how to get that information to people, because and as general baseline, a more informed investor will be a more successful investor. I think that's a very, it's hard to make any absolute statements within anything in life, but the better informed you are about anything, whether that be healthcare, your legal status on things that are going on, your financial, landscape of what you're doing, you're going to be more successful or typically yield a better income than if you weighted more ignorance to whatever you're doing in general. So again, I think AI can be a very powerful tool for that. Secondarily, something I'd like to expound a little bit more on is, feeding information into an AI, specifically, because that's something personally I struggle with as well, of, how detailed, do I necessarily need to get? Is it better to give kind of broader topics or really specific? Like if I fed into an AI saying, hey, my current pre-tax tax advantaged accounts have, this ETF, these mutual funds, this type of, money market with a specific interest rate. Is it better to give like specific assets and their allocations, or broader concepts of what you want to do? Or does it depend more on kind of what the end goal is? Like, hey, do I want it to write a specific like allocation report for me, or do I like on the actual securities I might be owning, or should it be broader, to kind of yield different results? Like, what kind of information should you input and what can you expect as the output?
So that's a really good question. So I basically take the approach, I don't want to call it the Skynet approach, but anything that you input digitally anywhere lives forever, regardless of what the disclaimers may be and how it might come out. So you have to start from that position. Then the question you would ask is worst case scenario. If I'm putting in my portfolio and I'm putting in questions about what the future may hold and things of that nature, am I concerned that information is going to get sold to a credit card company? I don't know. And frankly, I can't worry about it too much. I can't really care. I'm pretty careful with passwords. I'm pretty careful with two-factor authentication wherever money's involved. And I try to do the best I can to protect. And I think the large financial institutions have really done a pretty good job of keeping things clean. There's a lot of protection involved in that. I'm certain with your firm, Alex, I mean, the amount of confidential information you guys handle, I would imagine you're pretty hardened, but that doesn't mean you're not going to be subject to multiple attacks all the time. It's just kind of the way of the world. What I wouldn't put in, obviously, if you're contemplating something that's grossly illegal, I don't know that I didn't put that, even if I was doing it off of somebody else's machine. I don't think I'd go there at all, because you just don't know where that information ends up. And my attitude is always to overestimate the big brother factor, not underestimate. So am I putting things out there that could potentially come back and bite me? If the answer is I'm questioning an illegal move, or I'm getting an opinion on something that I wouldn't want printed in the New York Times or any other online entity, then I'm going to be a little bit cautious. I think it's the same. I would apply the same things to what I'm going to put in an AI as if the information would be discovered by someone that I truly respected, who had a really strong moral and ethical line throughout their entire life. So I think about it that way. As far as math issues, opinions, if I want to do deep research and I'm going to use something like Google Gemini, and it's going to go out and find 900 sources that are going to help me reach a potential decision, for me to do that research might take me a month. I can put the query in and I'll get a report in 10 minutes. So on something like that, could it snap back and bite me? Maybe. But then again, I can't worry about what might be as opposed to what my current needs are at the time. We are at the front end of this. So there have been, I would call it maybe 3 or 4 major technology shifts while I've been involved in financial advisory. I think, the first one obviously was the internet. And if you think of the internet gave you access to the information of the world. Disorganized, most of it useless. A lot of things that now pop up based on how search algorithms work, basically are now structured to keep your eyeballs on it. So it doesn't a lot of times give you anything except kind of that top line, is this store open? Can I order this kind of thing? But that was huge. Second transition was being able to put all the information on these things, the palm of your hand. That was the second thing. But still, it wasn't really a responsive device. It gave you maybe answers to questions, but you couldn't just get it there. Now, I've got a ChatGPT app. I can talk to it. It talks back. And it will basically scour the digital world for everything to give me an answer that's contextual. Everything from possibly looking at a financial plan to seeing what's new on streaming services we haven't seen yet. And in the case of chat, it gets to know you. It gets to know your preferences. It gets to understand. Now, does that mean that I won't be targeted for specific information or specific products based on what I say? No. I can't assume that it doesn't. It probably will. Occasionally, I'll be having conversations with my wife. We have Alexa in our household, and I'll start to see related information pop up on my Google homepage. I'd like to say it's a coincidence, but I don't think it is. So I don't know where the data is going. No, it's not. So, but is it harmful to me? No. Is it interesting? Yeah. But again, it doesn't prevent me from utilizing tools that are going to allow me to expand my reach or my knowledge. And what I look at with these AI tools was the internet gave us information. Well, you can have information you can respond to. That may give you an experience, but the ability to reflect on that experience and actually turn it into wisdom is time consuming and sometimes pretty mentally expensive. Experience is a tough teacher because you've got to do the thing before you get it. Well, now I'm finding using a lot of these AI tools, I can pump in decades of experience of people that I might interview on Zoom calls against baseline knowledge, and it comes out with wisdom. Like you think it might be this, but in actuality, upon reflecting on all this information, this is what happens. And I can create that at the moment of need. And I think that's one of the real evolutions that we're seeing right now in tech.
Yeah, and from that perspective, again, I definitely agree wholeheartedly with, understanding what you're putting into these things, right? It's all cheeky and fun. I mean, I remember back when Siri first came out, it was always, fun to be like, hey, like, what do I do with a dead body or something? And it would tell you how to find a metal foundry, which I found interesting. But keeping in mind that, like, if you're asking it for illegal stuff, this stuff lives in perpetuity out there. And as cheeky and fun as it might be, I think we're at a point where people need to understand what you're putting into these things lives forever, right? So, just being aware of that. And again, the example I just used is definitely hyperbolic. Again, I don't think anyone that actually has that use case is probably asking an AI tool for that kind of thing. I hope not. And if they are that dumb, then they deserve to get caught. But the aspect of things, especially like, if you're asking something for legal advice, right? Understanding, especially if you are in a position where, you have a legitimate concern of, an issue that you might have, being broader in context, or just understanding that, hey, when to ask a living, breathing human, a professional, someone that has a duty for privacy to you, those questions would be, a better route to go. So, again, understanding where AI is very beneficial, or understanding when you need to, actually talk to someone with a pulse on the other end, I think is kind of an important distinction we need to make. Because oftentimes when technology, especially one of those, kind of new caveats comes in, people tend to gravitate towards it and think, oh, well, what is the need for, XYZ professional now, right? And I think that's especially pervasive in the financial planning or the professional services realm, of understanding that these things can be great. But, one thing that, AI doesn't have is, intuition to a point, right? It can take in all of these things, but understanding, if you were to ask AI in general, let's take tariffs, for example, right? What's just happening with tariffs. If you were to say, hey, is it, would tariffs generally be good, done in this manner, for the economy, can we expect to see this? They would probably say no. And you might think, oh, well, that's probably not going to happen. But understanding the propensity of a certain administration to do things that might not be in line with, general, what you might think should happen to actually happen. Again, those kind of insights can be drawn from a professional that maybe, has more experience in just knowing human nature, right? It's never going to, fully mimic human nature. It'll get there, information machine learning can certainly get you there, but I would think that, AI probably wouldn't have seen a tariff war coming, to any meaningful degree. So again, understanding, when to utilize professionals and also how AI can integrate to that. The next question I would probably have for you, though, is what kind of benefit, or maybe how should people be using AI to maybe kind of fact check or understand what's going on, especially with their financial planning, right? If you want to say, hey, this person's doing this, okay, great, I understand it, but let me double check this. How should people kind of weight that, right? Because it can be a very powerful tool for developing your own financial plan. But if you want to have, again, use it as a check and balance, how do you feel like the best way for people to integrate that, and also not just constantly going back to your financial planner going, hey, Jim and I said this, why are we doing Y, right? It can start to create a little bit of friction. I know I've experienced that too. I tell someone something that I know to be completely factual, and, Chat GPT spits out something that has the information in the wrong order and some factually inaccurate stuff. And I'm like, well, this is wrong. It's like, well, it said that, it's AI. I'm like, well, I'm a professional with this much experience. so I don't know what you want me to tell you, right? So what's kind of your thought on, utilizing it in best practices and how people can kind of, you know, politely or with as least friction as possible, use it as something that can help to check and balance what other people are doing for them?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And again, it depends on your level of interest. There are many clients that have had long-standing relationships with their advisors. They've been with them for decades, and they can see basically that their advisor is paying close attention to them. They hear from their advisor on a regular basis, not necessarily to discuss money, but just to make sure they're in touch with their life. They really have a role of primacy in guiding that particular individual. So those folks may have the comfort of knowing they're being cared for and not a lot of, let's say, skepticism. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't have intellectual curiosity to learn more about what's going on. So whether you're a skeptic and you're new with an advisor or you're self-directed, one of the things you consider is take your year-end statement and your most recent security statement. Use a black marker to just get rid of your personal information and account number on top, because you don't want to feed the thing something that may end up someplace else. Feed it in. Create a PDF file, feed it in. You could probably use ChatGPT or Gemini. They'd both work in this case. And from there, type in, hey, here's what I think is going on. Here's why. Here's what my needs are in the future. Am I on track? And it's going to come through, and it may do a variety of things. It will look at your individual securities. It will probably come back and say, well, look, you own this, that, and the other thing, but you have an overconcentration in these 5 stocks. And so you're not really utilizing the benefits of asset allocation or diversification. You might consider this. Also, we notice that you own a bond fund, which you think is fixed income, which it isn't, because it doesn't have a dependable return. And you should discuss with your advisor the following things to make sure your portfolio stays on track. Or everything we can see looks great. These are the assumptions we're using. Are you comfortable with us using these assumptions? Or something as simple as you pump it in at the end of 2024 and you say, based on these goals, what should I be discussing with my financial advisor about rebalancing my portfolio? Is that something I should consider? Do I have overconcentrations in areas, and what are the risks? Now, these are questions you might want to discuss with your advisor, but unfortunately, Alex, what ends up happening is that most clients who joined an advisor somewhat earlier in their career with, maybe they joined with a couple $100,000, and that advisor's been in business a long period of time, that advisor has an asymmetry in the distribution of assets in their clients. If that advisor is running $300 million, which is not unusual, 20% of those clients basically probably control $220 to $240 million worth of assets. So the advisor tends to focus on that group more, while the people that have been with the advisor the longest, who may have less money, don't necessarily get the attention that they should get or used to get when they first started. That would be a cohort that should absolutely be supplementing themselves with AI and make sure their investments are still well connected. It's not the advisor wants them not to be, but the reality is that advisors pay attention to the people that they feel need them the most for the most part. So there's a lot of things that are involved in that. AI can certainly assist an advisor in making certain they're on the right track or considering alternative investments and how they might fit. Again, you can't break these things. You don't need programming skills to do it. Most of them will accept dictation. In other words, you can speak to the AI in your voice. You don't even have to type. And it's going to come back with a pretty well-reasoned answer. Do you want to check that answer before you implement it? You absolutely do. Maybe you ask another AI, which I've also done. So it's like asking Alexa to comment on what Siri says. But these tools are getting better every day, every nanosecond. And I think they become an enhancement that allows you to harvest all past experiences to the current question from sources that are endless. If they're in the digital realm, the AI can go out and grab it. And they're getting better and better at doing that. Frankly, I think that for anyone that interacts at all and has a query about anything in their financial life, not to use AI as an adjunct, I think you're leaving a lot of potential useful knowledge on the table that you may not want. You at some point in the future, you can say, I wish I would have asked that back then, and I never got around to it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you make, and I think as far as kind of one of those tools that people may not necessarily realize, AI doesn't have to be something that you just feed in like a typed prompt or a dictated like voice to text talk prompt. You can actually upload statements, like you mentioned, like a financial statement of a year end, use it as a check and a balance. Now, are there some AIs that you feel are better suited towards, scraping data off of a PDF, or are they all kind of on an even keel?
Well, as far as data scraping goes, I haven't noticed much difference in them, depending upon what you're going to be asking the PDF. By way of example, if I wanted to do an assessment of investments and I had a PDF version of the statements and I fed it into Google LM, all Google LM is going to know is what I fed it. That's it. It's not going to answer any questions. It's not going to bring in any external research sources since Google LM is a closed loop system. The only data it looks at is the data you give it. Now, if I take that same thing and I feed it into ChatGPT or Gemini Plus, I can start to ask it to go out and do research for me. And I can ask it to do research doing certain things, such as if I wanted to create a briefing sheet and a commentary based on what I should be thinking about going forward, Gemini Plus has a feature called Canvas. And I could say, hey, write me a research document analyzing what I'm doing currently and make recommendations based on anything you can find as to what I should do going forward. So it would scrape the document first, it would create an output, and it would scour everything for opinions, outcomes, and all the rest. Google LM would not do that. ChatGPT could probably do a similar job, but I find ChatGPT doesn't do as thorough a job at writing as does Gemini Plus. So again, it depends on the need. And since these tools are really fast, they're all web-based, you're not downloading software, you can go up and spend an hour or two and just figure out, all right, so for creative writing, what am I going to use? Well, for creative writing, I use Claude. It's an Anthropic tool. It's not as up to date with information, usually a few months behind where some of the others are, but it writes really well, and I can tell it to write in a certain voice if there's an author I like. But as far as analysis goes, it's going to look at my PDF, and basically it's going to say, there's not much I can do with this. Here's what I see. I take it to chat, I get something else. I take it to Gemini Plus, I get something else entirely. So again, you've got to think about what you need the outcome to do. What's that output need to be? And then experiment a little bit with where the best place to do that is. As an advisor, if I had someone come to me and said they want to buy a set of multifamily homes and put it in their IRA, and it was just going to be that investment, and they're really dedicated to do it, and they've got enough cash in their IRA or 401k to do it, I would say, hey, I'm at UBS. We really can't do that. I apologize, but you should give Alex Perny a call over at Advanta because I think they can handle it. So it's similar to that. Now, if I didn't know about you or didn't know about that service, and I did this earlier today, I posed this question to Gemini. And I said, if I'm an investor with a large 401k balance and I want to buy a commercial office building, or I want to invest in an alternative asset that I can get a good valuation on, what's my best way to go about it? Well, good for you. You guys came up. Now, if I'm an investor and I want to do that, I type that in, I'd use Gemini Plus. Hey, contact Advanta. And there was a link to your site, which I thought was pretty cool. So clearly it's aware of that.
Yeah, we're kind of in the middle of that right now, which again, to any of the AI overlords that are listening on this conversation, thank you. But we have been getting a lot of traction from that. And we're starting to talk to our developers about, what are they, and again, this is the secret sauce we're never going to figure out, but trying to figure out, SEO is a very mature science at this point of figuring out how the different search engine optimizations actually go and how the algorithms run. It's a pretty well-oiled science. It changes, but again, there's a good idea of like figuring out what's going to get you on that Google homepage, right? Of keyword queries. But the AI is a little bit different for data scraping on what they're weighting and different things. But we've been coming up, at least as a company, a lot more when people are kind of prompting those questions for alternative assets, whether it be commercial real estate, different alts, things that a UBS, a Merrill, or a Fidelity can or won't handle. So again, trying to figure that one out has been kind of a fun project over the last few months, because it's starting to really get ahead of steam right now with a lot of people reaching out for that. So yeah, also understanding kind of where these things are providing information is a little bit of an unknown, right? Of when you're asking an AI a question, understanding how each one of these things actually goes through and provides the answer. Again, there is that is something that is lacking on what you might get from a human being, of asking like, hey, like, can you coherently explain exactly why you did that? And they'll say, okay, well, to your projections of what you're looking at and X, Y, and Z, I can provide this. And also how I know you, right? Like, I know that, this particular investment might provide the goal, but maybe you're uncomfortable with that. Maybe there's someone that really doesn't like owning something like Lockheed or Northrop Grumman in their portfolio, right? They're like, that's something I really don't want. Or there's someone that, says, hey, look, I don't mind these kind of things, but I really don't want to be invested in, companies that are located or have headquarters or associations with these things, right? And you could probably get AI to do that, but is it a little bit easier to talk to someone that's known you for 20 years to do that? Probably. So again, that's one thing I like to make sure people understand about AI is, intention of the investor, right? Intention is not always just a end goal of either retirement, net portfolio value, or returns that are being given. Again, all investors love those things, but we typically invest with not just that end number in mind, right? If we're investing in a company that doesn't align with our moral values, some of us might be more flexible than others on some of those things, but again, that's some things that these things can't unless very specifically prompted to do, and it might take quite a while to figure that out. So, the where I'd like to kind of bring this in for a little bit of a landing on your thoughts on AI are specific to understanding where this stuff, like how you can kind of implement it on not just a specific use case. Are there ways to kind of utilize AI that will be a little bit more automatic? Are there any of these AIs that you can kind of set up to have like a recurrent review of something? Again, that probably would come with maybe a little bit more access to maybe financial accounts and things like that that you may not want to give, or maybe they can't do. But is there any way to kind of like that you've seen or that you've done maybe with different tools to help integrate this stuff to a little bit more of an automatic thing, where you can get maybe like a periodic review and update of your portfolio and performance, or something else entirely that you want a little bit more of an eyes-on approach to?
No, it's an interesting question. And, we go from the interactive nature of this to almost the passive nature. You think about it almost in terms of subscriptions that you've forgotten you took, which seemed really important at the time, and you see a repetitive charge for something you don't recognize 3 years later, and you realize, what did I spend this $200 on? And because it seemed good at the time, but it basically is keeping an eye on things, but you never use it. So I don't know that that's necessarily going to be a great use case. I think the concept now of being able to interact with specific questions regarding a situation and updating that information. ChatGPT does a good job as of when they start it. It gets to know you. It remembers everything. It remembers every chat you've had. So if you go up and pose a question 6 months later on a seemingly tangentially related topic, it's going to come back and say, well, based on everything we know about you and everything you've told me in between, we don't think this is really going to fit for the following reasons. And it can bring in some external information. So I don't necessarily know that it's going to keep an eye on things automatically. I'm certain that there are APIs you could put together that would allow an auto feed once, let's say, your statements are published on your online, but you're going to have that kind of blocked at the source, because you're not going to have an AI be able to go in and sign on to your portal and pull down year-end valuations without the human being in that chain. I don't see that happening. You mentioned one other thing that I just wanted to expand upon. You mentioned this concept of SEO. Right now, the biggest source of SEO search and keywords, believe it or not, are AI-enhanced transcriptions of podcasts. Because as you well know, we're I think recording on Riverside today. Riverside will produce a full transcription of the podcast. Well, that's out on the web, and that becomes searchable based on keywords. And when I started to look at creating my own podcast, I realized, I can hire these SEO firms to optimize my website and have no idea what's happening or when. Or I look at the emerging dominance of information that can be created conversationally like we're doing, and how that can enhance SEO and right across the board. So that's one advantage of kind of AI in the background that I think can be super helpful, especially when you start to do SEO searches not by keyword, but by concept. I know this is a little geeky, but I'm certain you understand where I'm going, and I know you're tech guys because you have a very strong website. And it wouldn't surprise me at all to see that emerge on more and more websites, that kind of AI interface where it's going to be able to pull from anything, but through a particular portal. That's going to be a chat that's basically just dedicated to whatever your firm is focused on. So I think that's probably the next iteration.
And that's a really good point, because I think in the back of my mind, I know this, but I don't think people maybe kind of understand is that, prompting AI with specific queries, right? It's great. I have a specific question I need help with, like, is my financial plan going to work for X, Y, and Z, and have it kind of work that algebra for you, or, fact checking things. But I think the conceptual part of it is really interesting and powerful, just like you said, of maybe not querying a prompt with a specific question, but broader concepts, right? It's, what's the meaning of life? That'd be interesting to spit and see what it spits out for that. But again, conceptually, again, those broader concepts, I think, are a very powerful tool, because as you said, again, so many things are getting transcribed in AI, for dictation purposes. And it's a really cool part about what Riverside does. It helps my producer very well to compile this and also come up with keyword titles and tags, which it also does. It has tools to help you figure that out, which, apply to SEO, which is super cool that you can use it, something built in like Riverside to do. But, being able to query, whether it be a search function, that maybe has an AI integration, or just querying AI with a conceptual question as well, can be very powerful to help you narrow down what your goal for that specific case might be. And especially with finance too, query something general, then query your, individual, portfolio maybe, and then see where those lines of intersection cross on the graph, and then help to try to meet those two goals. I think is something that, people maybe don't necessarily understand. I think we conceptually get that it can happen, but, kind of having it spoken to you to tell you, hey, try that out, I think is, maybe the push that people need to kind of start using these things, not only for a specific query case, but also, the broader conceptual questions that we have. If it, and I would love it, for the geeks out there, if it spits out 47 when you ask what the meaning of life is, that'd be pretty cool. And maybe it'll give us a little bit of a Hitchhiker's Guide reference. I doubt it, but I would love it if one of them actually just spit out 47.
Yeah, that's a number that I don't want to think about right now. Not sure why I came up with that number, but that's not one of my favorite
Hitchhiker's
numbers.
Guide to the Galaxy, like
I got it.
In that
Yeah.
book series, like what's the meaning of life, and it just says 47.
Yeah.
It's for the geeks out there that enjoy that book series.
They ask it what's 1 + 1, and it tells you purple. It probably needs some better information.
Maybe this isn't the greatest use case. For anyone that hasn't read Hitchhiker's Guide, I do recommend it. Great series of books. But anyways, to kind of bring this in for a little bit of a landing, I really enjoyed, the conceptual conversation around AI, in a manner that only gives people like the information about, being maybe less afraid of it, but also some very high level use cases of how you can use this, as well as, hey, how do I, kind of plug in information from my portfolio, whether that's uploading like a PDF image of, what you personally have going on, or maybe having it kind of fact check what your financial advisor is doing and saying maybe, hey, is this still in line, or are these things really what they are? I think is incredibly powerful, for people. It's don't just go out and ask, hey, like, what stock's going to go up the most tomorrow, right? I think that's maybe not the best use case. And hey, if it's spitting out accurate information, then let's all go out and do it. But again, from the concept of being able to use this stuff for ultimate end goals and how it can actually drive the data that you need to make the most informed decisions and get you to where you want to go, I think, again, we're at a real paradigm shift of how these things can be very useful to people past just saying, hey, what's for dinner? Which I've asked it before. And honestly, it actually came with some pretty good ideas. If you give it like, hey, I don't want Italian food, I'm not really in the mood for this. I want to, like, you can actually give it like all these different things, and I want the meal to be under 900 calories. Like
Yeah.
it'll give you a pretty good idea of what you're going to eat for dinner, which again, maybe a little bit just fun use case, but again, it give you pretty good info. So with that said, are there any things that we kind of haven't covered in the world of AI and finance that you think are some really compelling points that we want to kind of drive home at the end of this conversation?
Yeah, I think I would take that kind of the opposite way, Alex, in that AI kind of gives you the ability to iterate on the power of the possible, or maybe even the power of the impossible. That you go from maybe it's an existential question to maybe it's a practical question. But for instance, if I were to look at all the elements in all the things sitting in my refrigerator and just take an image of all of those things, and I would say, I don't know what I want to eat for dinner tonight. Can you come up with something? Well, I'd never think about it. It might come up with 5 different things, including the recipes of things that
Yeah.
I already have. So, again, it's the power of what might be possible. So I think that the key takeaway here is don't think just because we can't come up with an answer as humans, an answer doesn't exist, because we don't know what everybody else has thought about or even considered or pondered. So put in the most out there comments you can think about. Put in your own opinions. Put in questions that, could be, a deep moral interest, or put in questions that you're searching for a practical outcome. Don't limit yourself to how you interact. Because if you think about it, the most powerful computer in the world is always the one that sits up here.
Mm-hmm.
But having the ability to sift through just unlimited amounts of data, which is expanding exponentially every year, and not take advantage of that ability, not take advantage of what that could do possibly for you in all realms. I think we're leaving a lot of wisdom on the table, and I think that's the direction this thing needs to go. Be expansive, be creative, be imaginative, and don't just come to an answer that basically is a result of fear or confirmation bias or what happened yesterday in the stock market. Think about what's possible. And be nice.
Yeah,
Absolutely correct.
Say thank you.
I do.
Well, great. I think it's a very compelling conversation for a very expansive thought, not no pun intended, that people really need to start having, because whether you like it, love it, or leave it, it's here to stay, right? We're not gonna, the genie is out of the bottle, and it's only going to continue to evolve. And I think the people that can learn how to utilize these tools in an appropriate manner can really yield some pretty outsized results. And again, that's not just talking about financial, that's talking about anything that you're trying to get done in life. Use this kind of stuff as a tool. Again, to your point, data is, it's, I can't remember the math concept of, talking about the amount of data that is constantly being, just out there, right? Every second of every day it is, more than the next. And it's just, conceptually, the data science is interesting. It's a whole nother podcast to talk about someone on. But to be able to have a tool that can go out there and sift through all of this data to find stuff that you otherwise might not be able to even think of on a conceptual or practical level, it's incredibly powerful. So, with that said, again, I really appreciate you being on here today. The most valuable asset we all have is our time, because no one, including AI, can make any more of it for us. We will have a very limited amount of it. So thank you very much for being on with us today. If people are interested in learning more about what you have going on professionally or what you have, what you do on an outward basis, how can people reach out to you and find you?
A couple of different ways. They can come up on my website, which is BetterPath Training, all one long word, betterpathtraining.com. And they can access from, if you're a professional advisor, there's a lot of good resources up there. It talks about my individual coaching program, what I'm doing with helping teams that have senior members who are looking to opt out in the next 10 years, and how we train their junior members. There's information up there. There's also links to a podcast that I'm in the process of launching, titled If the Public Only Knew. And that tries to bridge the gap between the financial advisor and the investor. What is the financial advisor saying? What's the investor hearing? What's the investor saying? What's the FA hearing? And I'm pretty excited about that as well. And we cover a lot of different topics on that also. So they can find me through that. They can also find me through LinkedIn. There's contact information up there. And they'll also find information on the website about a new program I'm launching for, I would say, the higher end of the advisor community. It's going to be called a BetterPath Mastermind, which basically is just going to put 15 to 20 really successful advisors in a room once a month or so with me as the moderator, and really trying to create better client outcomes through the sharing of information and wisdom from some of the brightest people in the industry. And I'm pretty excited about that as well. So that's just information. So there's a lot of ways they can find out more.
Fantastic. Well, certainly a very compelling conversation here today. If anyone is interested, I do highly recommend you reach out to Gary. I think it's illustrated by this podcast. He certainly has a wealth of knowledge on any of these topics, and it's very refreshing to have people like him on the podcast. With that said, again, thank you everyone for joining. This has been another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. My name is Alex Perny, and have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Tune in next week for more investing tips and strategies.
Want to hear more episodes of the Alternative Investing Advantage? Search podcast at advantaira.com and subscribe.